That's DB. I'm Ravi. We're joined now by Paul Keels of the Ohio State Radio Network. Paul, how are you this morning?
Everything's good. How's it going out there?
There's that voice. We're okay. We're reeling. We couldn't get off the ropes. It took a couple of headshots. We're taking a knee right now, getting that standing 8 count. But how is that different than you think than kind of what you guys went through emotionally, feeling like you could have controlled the end of that game against Oregon to come out with a better outcome than actually what happened? Would you rather take it on the chin like we did or be where you were?
Well, it's similar but different. One of the things that Ryan Day talked about a lot after that game at Oregon ended was, one of his big slogans has been leave no doubt and don't let a game be decided by one player or one call. And, Ohio State kind of hurt themselves with a turnover, with a lost fumble, a lost possession with an onside kick they didn't get, and then a number of penalties. So, their inability in those areas kind of put it in a position to where the end of the game worked out the way it did. But despite all of that, they had a chance. They just weren't able to execute. They weren't able to get the kind of defensive pressure that they'd gotten in their previous opponents. So, a 1-point loss on the road against what's now the number one team in the country, in most cases, it washes a little easier than what Nebraska went through, but it's still surrounding a football program that's got high expectations.
Paul, when you look at the way that game ended and how that result was, and then going directly into a bye week, how do you think that affects the team mentally versus going into the bye week off of a more normal result? Like that's an unusual spot to have a break after.
Yeah, it is, and that's what's kind of crazy about this year and next when you're going to have 2 byes. But it's still burning with him. I mean, we had Coach Day on one of our network radio shows last night. You can tell that it's still chewing at him. But at the same token, he's talked about, and the players have to adapt this too. They've got to move on because really a majority of their goals are still in front of them. The only goal that's not there is an undefeated season. They can still win a Big Ten championship. They can still compete for a national championship if they take care of everything that's in front of them. So it's trying to find the proper perspective, even though you're coming off of a disappointing defeat like that.
Paul, I just getting ready for film study for the broadcast. Watch Ohio State a lot. What are folks saying locally about kind of the cohesiveness, I guess I'll say, on the defensive side of the ball between how Knowles likes to play defensively versus how a guy like Coach Johnson Sr. likes to manipulate that offensive line? It seems like those guys could be a little more dominant and even take it up another level. Is this just simply getting together over time, or is there something there that doesn't allow them to be as efficient sometimes?
Well, I think if you look at the way the defense performed leading up to the Oregon game, you'd have no questions about it. The sack numbers aren't gigantic, but you saw the pressures that they put on. They forced turnovers. They got 2 defensive scores in the very first week of the game, but obviously the competition was at a different level with who they played in their last game. So there's still a feeling that this is a defense that can do what they're expected to do, and that is to limit explosive plays, something that, for the most part, they were able to do last year. That was kind of the concern a couple of 3 years ago when Jim Knowles was brought in. So, when you've got the background that he has, the background that Larry Johnson has, those are 2 coaches that have been doing it very well for a very long period of time. And consider the fact, too, that these players will be motivated knowing that, everybody's talked about how defensively they couldn't get pressure on Oregon's quarterback, how they gave up explosive plays like they had not in the first few games prior to that. So, even with the difficulty they had in Eugene, I think people, if you think about it realistically, understand this is a defense that has shown and they have the ability to play better than they did.
Paul, when you're looking at Jeremiah Smith, obviously Ohio State's had a laundry list of outstanding receivers, some that have played very, very well as freshmen. Where does Jeremiah Smith kind of fall on that spectrum? Because he's been unbelievable.
It's hard to compare because it's been a long time since you've had a true freshman explode on the scene as quickly as he has. Chris Olave really did it after an injury to Austin Mack. We didn't see Marvin Harrison really do it until after Olave and Garrett Wilson had opted out of playing in the Rose Bowl a few years ago. But, the combination of his size, his athleticism, and having a quarterback that has done a pretty good job of putting the ball where he can make plays has really resulted in seeing some spectacular plays. He's he's kind of setting himself apart. But, I think also you have to look at, too, that he got the opportunity to start and play a lot right out of the get-go that a lot of guys haven't had. But he deserves it.
Paul, when you're taking a look at this offense and kind of where they want to be with all of the weapons, you two really, really good backs, and they punch, counterpunch, and kind of trade off with their level of effectiveness. What does the offense look like when it's functioning the way that Day and Kelly want it to for the long haul?
It looks like an offense that gives a defense headache about which poison do you want to pick. You think about what Jeremiah Smith has done, throwing in Emeka Ibuka and the other receivers. G. Scott has had a very productive start to the season at tight end, and Will Howard, who brings a great deal of experience and brings a running threat that Ohio State hasn't had since Justin Fields. Now, the question was going into the season, the play of the offensive line, and there's a big question now because of the season-ending injury to Josh Simmons at tackle. But it's an offense when it's clicking and when they're taking care of the football, they've shown the ability to be able to run with those backs that you talked about, but also to be able to stretch the field with deep passes, but also to be able to hit intermediate passes, including a couple of running backs that have shown the ability to catch the ball and do some things out of the backfield.
Paul, obviously, Ohio State's always a program that recruits at a super high level. See Jeremiah Smith as an example there. But they have brought in some super high-profile transfers this year as well, whether it's Will Howard, whether it's Quinshon Judkins, whether it's Caleb Downs. How do you think that Ryan Day has sort of managed, hey, I recruited a super high level, and these guys are guys that expect to play versus we think we can win a national championship here. Let's go get some reinforcements.
And I think you have to throw Seth McLaughlin in there at center, too, the young man they brought in from Alabama. But what's been almost as big as the guys they brought in was the guys that returned, especially you look at the two defensive ends, Jalen Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, Denzel Burke, guys that could have left and gone to the NFL but decided to come back and play, and play not only for a national championship, but to try and break that 3-game losing streak against Michigan and win a Big Ten championship. So it's been a combination of, recruiting guys that you mentioned coming from other programs with a shot at winning a national title, keeping the players you have, and that's kind of the new reality of college football, maintaining the players and not losing some of your key people to the transfer portal, but also having the bare bones of competing for a conference championship and a national championship and making it appealing to players. And, let's also not hide the fact that NIL has a lot to do with it, too, and Ohio State's been able to get the kind of support they've needed in that neighborhood to be able to make it attractive for players to come and players to stay.
Paul, is there something to, like, kind of the understanding that if it has that pro mentality and guys that are commanding NIL dollars get the first look, how important is it that the culture either offsets if they aren't playing well and you have to make different decisions with personnel, or that the guys you bring in are actually going to be who you need them to be?
Well, that's a question I wish there was an easy answer for, because there really isn't. It's, playing time certainly dictates a lot of what happens with guys if they decide to stay, or their guests on playing time if they decide to come. Because, there have been not only Ohio State, but other places where guys have left other schools to go there, and then they've decided to go someplace else. That's why you see in some of these bios guys that, and I know Nebraska has some that have played it at more than one or more than two schools. So it certainly has a lot to do with your feeling about the coaching staff, in particular your position coach, and has a feeling about the opportunity to compete for championships, whether it's conference or national championship, and also where can this program get you if you feel like you've got a chance at playing at the next level. And Ohio State certainly has shown that, they can compete to get into the playoffs, to compete for a national championship. They've shown the long-term ability to put guys in the NFL. So it's just a matter of where is the individual fit, where do the families feel about all of that, because that's a big part of it, not only just the families, but the people that surround these players. So it's certainly, it's a question, and it's a scenario that all schools and all coaching staffs are having to deal with.
Paul, obviously after Nebraska, you've got a huge one at Penn State, going to be a top 5 matchup. Any concern about a little bit of a look-ahead game?
No, because what this team did a few weeks ago, they had Iowa the week before they played Oregon, and they really went about defeating Iowa in a very workmanlike manner. So they've shown the ability to not look ahead. They know that Nebraska's got a talented team that can get, despite what happened at Indiana last Saturday. But also keep in mind, too, they're trying to get the taste out of their mouth of what happened in their last game against Oregon. So I think that probably goes a long way to not having this team looking ahead. Yeah, that's going to be a big one next week at Penn State, especially if Ohio State is fortunate enough to beat Nebraska. But they also understand, too, that they've got one loss in their ledger. They can't afford a second loss because, while things are still out there for them to achieve their goals right now, another loss takes that out of your hands.
That's Paul Keels. He is the play-by-play voice for Ohio State football. Paul, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, Paul.
All right, sounds good.
Appreciate
My pleasure.
you.
Great stuff there from Paul Keels of the Ohio State Radio Network. Ohio State, much like you, needs to keep their eyes straight forward and ahead of what's in front of them. That is the driver's job, and make sure you are not getting distracted. That's a message from the NDOT Highway Safety Office. Coming up next, we've got more college football. We got to get into some NFL. Great weekend there as well. That's DBM Ravi, more Hurrdat Sports Radio coming up next.